Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session. And in this session, we'll be talking about systemic work, constellations, and systemic leadership. If you want to work and lead systemically in an organization, what is required and how can constellating and leading systemically add to an organization's purpose and well-being? My guest for today has extensive experience in systemic phenomenological work. He's here to share about his experience, and his name is Jan-Jacob Stam. Jan-Jacob is the founder of the Bert Hellinger Institute in the Netherlands. He is internationally recognized as a leader in the field of systemic phenomenological work. He is a much valued trainer in more than 30 countries, a pioneer, researcher, and distributor of this systemic phenomenological work, including organizational constellations. He started his career with his studies in biology and educational sciences. He then worked as a teacher and for many years as a partner and management consultant within a Dutch consulting firm. Jan-Jacob is the author of a number of books that were translated in English, Spanish, and also other languages, including the books Fields of Connection, Wings for Change, and his most recent one, together with Barbara Hogenboom, Systemic Leadership. When speaking about his work, he says, and I quote, "The systemic way of thinking and looking at the world helps us to become aware of the mechanisms and dynamics that are at work in systems that we normally never notice. These are the dynamics that can, in one moment, give us wings to fly, and in another moment, hold us paralyzed and unable to act. Sometimes I feel like a little boy playing at the beach and finding this beautiful shell of systemic work. There's so much more to explore in this field, and what I've learned so far, I'm most happy to share with other people," unquote. And today he's here. Jan-Jacob, a very warm welcome to you. Thanks so much for being here with us in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Yeah, thank you so much, and welcome to you, and welcome to you all. And first of all, I have to apologize for my English. It's not my native tongue, so my English is somehow limited, but I'll do my best.
All right, well, thank you. Actually, we have speakers from so many different countries, and English is the dominant language in this summit, but who knows, we may change that at some point. For us, Jan-Jacob, I'd really love to start out with the field of systemic work. And we know each other from previous conversations and also the educational setting at the Bert Hellinger Institute. And in one of those conversations, you said that we really need to step up when it comes to systemic work. There's so much need out there in the world, and it's more about guts than safety. Could you speak more to what you said back then?
Yeah, actually, it's a little bit a tricky question. Because what I mean is stepping up. I need to clarify that a little bit.
Please.
For me personally, I don't feel a need to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel a need to adjust anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy with the world how it is at the moment.
Yeah.
But I notice it's the other way around. I notice there are many organizations and many societal issues who come somehow to the end of what they can do at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think their systemic thinking and systemic work could be additional to losing up the perspectives we are having now and add other perspectives. And the thing is, this whole approach of systemic work, it's in existence now for about 20 years, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And society is changing so rapidly that if we systemic workers do not step up now, so we need to step up, then we might miss the boat. Mm-hmm. for changing society. So at one hand, the request from society is getting bigger and bigger,
yeah,
for new perspectives. And at the other hand, me personally, I have no intention at all to change the world. And that might be a difference with many other systemic workers
All
who
right.
do have a way to change the world. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, thank you for bringing in this perspective into this
Yeah,
summit
yeah,
context,
yeah,
because indeed it's a different one. Because I was going to ask you next, if you feel that we need to step up in the sense that you just explained,
yeah,
it's very important that we find that connection with um, the people or the decision makers or the leaders or those who find themselves at the end of the rope of the views and methods or ways of dealing with where they find themselves and the future that they can see a glimpse of coming towards them. And I know that you work in the Bert Hellinger Institute as a founder and educator, but also you work with organizations and with clients. And so, could you share with us how does that collaboration emerge then? Because you do not have a wish to change the world, but others do, or at least their organizations. How do they find you, and how does a collaboration around the systemic start?
yeah. How they find me, I really have no idea. I, I think it goes, how do you say that, word by mouth. And I really have no idea how they find me, how they find us.
Hmm.
And usually the starting point for those organizations is we have an issue we worked on already in many different ways, but still it's stuck or we don't understand it or our interventions do not have the result that we want from them. And we want to understand better what's going on in our organization. So that's usually the point of departure. For
Yeah.
example, big municipality where
Hmm.
they say our sick leave is so high at the moment,
Yeah.
and it's already for many years high. And our HR department did everything they could, but it's still we don't get a grip on it.
Yeah.
But how they find me, I don't know. But these are usually the questions
Yeah.
with which they come, and then um, I need to find out, is there a kind of systemic aspect to it?
Yeah.
Systemic meaning there's something going on in that system that you cannot look at with just with managerial tools or the tools we know so well already. So first we have to check this.
Yeah.
Is it just lack of management skills or something, which is which is rarely the case.
Hmm.
So there's a kind of intake, usually a phone conversation or live conversation, and then we get a kind of sense, oh, maybe a systemic issue,
Yeah.
and then make appointments on, okay, what to do next. Shall we meet with the whole management team, or how many layers should we include on our first meeting? And then we either do a kind of systemic coaching or we do a kind of thing called a constellation, which is a live image
Hmm.
of a organizational system.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
live image is usually extremely helpful to see what are the relationships within, what are the patterns, and especially what are the hidden patterns
Yeah.
in an organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to sum up, when organizations find you,
Yeah,
even though the path is not entirely clear in terms of how they find you, but when they do, they have these type of questions that from how they see the world and the management tools and skills they have, they cannot break the pattern, or they have something that they cannot find an answer to or a way to
yes,
alter it. And so, and what you then do together with them is look at systemic aspect. What is the systemic aspect of this question? And then we
yes,
really rule out the things that are maybe not so systemic and can be solved in a different way. And when it is systemic, it sounds like you co-design what needs to be and who needs to be involved in taking on a different systemic perspective So it can free up some more space for alternative views. And it's so interesting because you already started describing what a constellation is. And constellations are not always your choice. Sometimes it's systemic coaching without constellations. But when you do a constellation, you just explain the definition. And so could you speak more to this question about what a constellation is? Because you just explained it about the patterns and usually the hidden patterns. Um, does that usually suffice when you explain what a constellation is, or do clients immediately understand?
Yeah, so well, the thing is, as I said, a constellation is kind of life image where you choose the main stakeholders either within an organization, either in relationship from the organization and the outside world. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, you could have an element like the present market or the potential market. You could have an element like our products, our goals, our services, but also elements like the management, production, finance, marketing, and the different aspects what makes the organization. So you need to find out always a little bit, should we look inside, should we look outside, or should we look at the relationship between the organization and the outside world?
Mm-hmm.
And you can literally make it either by designing, you could draw these elements out and how they are in a relationship. But what I do like is to use human beings who are so-called representing these elements. So it's possible that you suddenly are representing a goal of an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And straight enough, when you are representing that, you somehow get the same sensations as real goals, although we know real goals cannot talk. And yeah, so and that's a method.
Yeah.
And then it goes first more or less to a diagnose. What's going on? What are the main patterns? You never know that upfront,
Mm-hmm.
but you see it in the constellation.
Right.
And then there's an interesting thing. You can do interventions in the direction of what explains how things are going as they are going right now.
Right.
And you even can test alternatives. So what if we change these elements in relationship to each other? Is it felt as an improvement for the whole, or is it worse? Makes it the tension higher, or does it decrease tension? And so you co-create in a certain way in the direction of insights, what's going on in this organization,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes even solution space or solution. So what would be helpful in order that the system can do what it is intended to do? That's always the way of looking. I never look at systems like what's wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
I look at them what's needed in order that they can do what they are intended to do.
Right. Right. And so, wow, there's so many aspects that we can unpack from what you just said. And I am still with the representing,
Yeah.
because I do work with constellations, obviously, and I know the work, but I want to draw this out more for everyone else who's watching. The representing, does that mean that when you work with an organization, do we need to have people, for example, from a particular team or department to represent that who actually work in that department, or can it be anybody?
Um, how this representing exactly works and how constellations exactly work,
Mm-hmm.
we still do not know.
Mm.
We did a lot of research how this works because there's an interesting phenomenon. When you as a person
Yeah.
are invited, for example, to represent something called like a certain department,
Yeah.
and even when you do not work in that organization, and even if you have no clue what the content is of what that department, let's say a marketing department, what it's doing,
Mm-hmm.
even when you are there standing and there are other parts of the same organization standing, you get somehow information from that department, and you get information about the relationship to the other departments.
Right.
How this works, we really do not know.
Mm-hmm.
So very often I can explain what a constellation is, but I always have to say upfront how it knows we really do not work. But it seems of survival importance for human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine from still when we lived in tribes of maybe 100 people,
Yeah.
how important it is that where you are in that also system in the tribe, how important it is for the tribe as a whole, that you somehow get a sense of how is the whole functioning and how are my relationship to other parts of the tribe.
Yeah.
And I think this capability is still in every human being.
Mm-hmm.
I met a human being who cannot do this representing. I met many, of course, who said, I do not want to do it because this is strange, I do not understand, it's too weird,
Yeah.
and I cannot understand it.
Yeah.
But I know human being who cannot do it, who doesn't have the capability.
Right, right. So it's not so representing is not so much a skill that you need to learn, and
No.
it's not about knowing of the organization or even being
Yes.
or like a part of a team or an organization that is part of a constellation, but it's very much about having a function in terms of revealing the patterns when you are like representing in the context of a constellation. And so
Yes.
people are different people are then representing in a constellation. And what I hear you say is somehow they all get information about the bigger whole, about the bigger field that they are like representing a part in. So,
Yes.
so then, in your experience with clients, um, what is your idea about how much they trust a method if you cannot explain how it actually works? Because you say, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
explain what it is,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
cannot see how it works. I just know that it works. So, what does
Yes.
that do with
Yes.
trust levels?
Well, for me, it was an eye opener a couple of years ago when the feedback came from, especially the Dutch business world, of course,
Mm-hmm.
where my main experience was at the moment.
Yeah.
And also, there are many other constellators. Then the feedback was we do trust the method, but we do not trust the facilitator. And for the first 10 years of constellation work, we always thought in the business world, in organization work, they do not trust this method because we cannot explain it.
Ah.
But it's the other way around. They do trust the method, but they don't trust the facilitator. So I think what's really important,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the method of a constellation underneath, there's a whole lot of theory. And I'm not going to explain the whole theory,
No.
although usually I give a short introduction when I work with a team, a short introduction about the theory.
Yeah.
And that introduction uh, has the aim that they know from which paradigm do I work.
Right.
And the thing is, um, trust is built on being clear about what I do know, and also being clear what I do not know, and being clear about from which paradigms, from which underlying principles do I work.
Yeah.
And that's where trust is built on.
Yeah.
So client can work from their perspective, I work from my perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and together we step in a field.
Yeah.
And that's the basis of trust.
Yeah.
And the method, if they trust me, they also trust the method.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's my experience. And I hardly have to explain. Of course, it's a little bit strange for them, for a team of managers, suddenly to stand up and to place themselves in relationship with each other
Mm-hmm.
and begin to feel a little bit like exposed, or oh, what will my colleagues think of me?
Yeah.
But that's usually a couple of minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
then it works fine.
Right. Right. So I find that fascinating that being clear about the paradigm you work from is what
Yes.
builds the trust. And as you're saying it, I'm like, okay, it's almost as if, and it's not entirely the same, but when, for example, leaders work with lean consultants or scrum masters or holacracy people, or then the method has a name and it has a body of knowledge. And somehow there's the clarity and the certainty around the name of it, and the underlying principles gives a trust to say, okay, I want to work with them or I do not want to work with them. I think I need them right now or I do not need them right now. And even though I think this with the underlying principles is more profound than just putting a label on of, oh, this is a lean consultant. But what I'm trying to say is it gives a sense of certainty, a sense of that you need to trust someone or something or someone you work with by understanding what they're bringing. And I think that underlying values and principles really help with that. So thanks for
Yeah.
your explanation.
No.
Because the systemic world is a growing field, and we do not all have the same principles when we say we do constellation work or systemic work, or so it's
Yeah.
very important, apparently, to be clear about that. And so what I also wanted to talk to you about is when you work with clients, there are ways to work where at the end of the work, everyone sort of feels fuzzy and good, like, oh, we have a solution now. What I notice in systemic work is that there's also other outcomes of at the end of a constellation or at the end of working with them, and people need to sit and reflect rather than have all this, oh, we have a solution now. Could you speak to that about your experience with that?
Yes. So basically, I make a distinction between first order, second order, and third order interventions,
Mm-hmm.
where first order interventions have as a result a solution. So a better constellation, so to speak, where everybody feels happy. Second order interventions have as a result insights and understanding on, oh, this is going on in our organization, and we were not aware of this before this day.
Yeah.
But they still need to translate these insights into, okay, what are we going to do now
Yeah.
in the organization? And third order interventions are a little bit bringing a whole system in a kind of transformational state.
Yeah.
Second order interventions usually very often do not feel nice the moment they come to the surface. For example, recently, people came for a constellation from a really big semi-public organization in the Netherlands, which is
Mm-hmm.
responsible for infrastructure.
Yeah.
And they came with a question, how can we start a certain transition,
Mm-hmm.
a transition in the relationship between us and contractors in the Netherlands, big contractors.
Okay.
And the constellation showed, and that's what I said at some point, hey, wait a moment, forget about transition. If you do transition, it will be more of the same and it won't work.
Mm-hmm.
So news of the day is transition is not possible here.
Yeah.
It either will be a reset, either a whole transformational process. So at first moment, they were a little bit shocked because they came with a question, how do we do a transition process?
Yeah.
And
So they wanted
then
a
I had,
solution.
yeah, and but the moment it's clear for me, it's not going to work, transition in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So then I tell the bad news immediately,
Yeah.
or so-called bad news.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me just see if I understand you correctly. They come to you with this question. You start working with them, And then at some point, the constellation or the systemic work reveals that it requires something else. It requires something deeper. Is that when you discover that, or is that something that you discover beforehand?
No, I discovered that in the constellation.
Right.
This is what shows what's really going on. I never know upfront what's going on. It's always a surprise to me. So it means that me as a facilitator, basically, I'm the instrument and not just the constellation. The constellation helps for all of us to get a kind of view of what's going on. And the constellation is also a kind of body of resonance. So everybody in the room, including representatives, they are a kind of body of resonance. And the moment, for example, I say a transition is not going to work, this system needs a reset, for example, it resonates with everybody in the room. If it doesn't resonate, I immediately skip my hypothesis or my observation. And so that's the way how together you build and you work yourself in a certain way through the existing patterns, in a way that the participants, they are all a little bit beyond the existing patterns, and look from there.
Yeah. So, and as you're sharing this, I hear you mention a couple of almost different levels. There's levels in interventions. So there's first order interventions for solutions. Second one are more about discovering the pattern and seeing what are we going to do with this now. And then there's even third order interventions that are even at a deeper level. And what I also hear you say is that there's different types of changes or different levels of change in the system that happen almost in alignment with these different order of interventions, saying we can have a transition, but that's usually more of the same. And then there is, I heard you say, reset, which is how we go, coinciding with how are we going to do this now? Because how are we going to do this now is a question of how do we build a new pattern in our way of doing business. And then there's a third order, and that sounds like a total overhaul of who you are as a company. Did I get that right in the last one?
Yes. And the thing is, when you look at these four different ways of change, when you look at them from a systemic perspective, you can look at what happens with the patterns and what happens with the parts. So for me, when I speak about development, you don't change anything about the system as a whole, but you do things that it can reach its fullness, its adult position, so to speak, and integrate everything it needs to integrate in order to do what it needs to do. But the stay and the patterns stay. And for me, change basically is the patterns in a system stay the same, but you use these patterns to produce new products or new markets or new services. I was very much triggered by the word transition in the energy world, where they all speak about transition. But when I worked a lot with them from the energy field. But when I noticed, basically the patterns stay the same, and they want to reach different goals, but within the same patterns and the same patterns in society. So transition is for me a little bit a larger scale of a change process, where change is patterns stay the same, but you do something different with them.
Right. So these first two, with these first two, development and change, or at a larger scale, transition, where the patterns stay the same. This is where the level where you do first order interventions. So this is like you're looking for a solution, and then we're going to be working towards that.
Yes, yeah, I think, yeah, you could say it like that.
Oh, okay.
And then what I find an interesting one is I stumbled on a couple of years ago is the concept of reset. So reset is basically the parts stay together. So the stakeholders stay together.
Yeah.
The people in the team stay together, or how big the system is.
Mm-hmm.
But you say the patterns in our company or the patterns in our relationship with the outside world, with the market, these patterns, we cannot hold them anymore.
Mm.
So what can we do in order to make the commitment? We stay together as parts, but we try to grow beyond the patterns,
Mm.
to do a reset on the patterns.
Yeah.
It's not easy at all, because usually patterns are stronger than we. If we're
Yeah.
not aware of them, patterns are leading us instead of we are leading patterns. So
Right.
you need to be extremely aware of the patterns existing in your team or in your organization,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time say, okay, let's meet as if we start from scratch here.
Yeah.
This is really interesting, but a doable process. Not easy, but doable.
Right. So there's a commitment there to say we stay together, and
Yes.
we are committed also to creating new patterns.
Yes.
So the only thing that holds us together initially is the commitment to let go
Exactly.
of the old patterns and to create new ones.
Yes. And
Right.
it's still, but the identity, that's the difference with the first one, transformation.
Mm-hmm.
With reset, the identity of the organization stays the same.
Right.
And the thing with transformation is, my definition of transformation is, it's a process where at the end of the process, the identity of the organization is different.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you do not know what. So with transition, you always have an anchor point in the future, in your future goals.
Yeah.
But with transformation, you don't have such an anchor point.
Right.
So
Right.
that makes it a very delicate and not easy process to do transformation. And it's a little bit my concern that everybody speaks about transformation
Yeah.
nowadays.
Yeah.
But when we dive deeper in it, it's really not an easy process. And
Mm.
you know, what transforms by itself transforms relatively easily.
Yeah.
But when you say as a company, we need to transform, I see it in the financial work that the banks say we need to transform to something different. But it's really, it requires tremendously much from leadership and from many, many people in the organization. So
Yeah.
it's not an easy process.
Yeah. So if thank you for speaking to this. And what I wanted to say is the word transformation, we were also covering this in the summit, in other conversations, it pops up as a buzzword and something that is used in many different contexts, where actually when you really look at it, it's either more of the same, so it's more like change or transition, and sometimes it's reset, but it's hardly ever a true transformation, apparently, because it's one, very hard to do, and second, many hold a different sort of definition of what transformation actually is. And
Yes,
so if banks then say we need to transform, then whew, that's going to be very difficult, because they may not be calling themselves banks anymore at the end of the process. Um,
right.
do you also have an example of a reset, um, where you saw an organization or worked with an organization that went through a reset process?
Yes. So what pops in my mind is a reset on an organization. I think there are about somewhere between 100 and 200 employees in total, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And semi-public cultural organization.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a very strong pattern they wanted to work on, but the pattern was stronger than they are. And
Yeah.
they tried for many years. They changed directors, they changed the structure of the organization. This all did not help.
Yeah.
And then basically, actually, by naming the strongest pattern, it helped to, how do you say that, to get the poison out of that pattern. So there was a relationship between two parts of that organization, and that relationship created fear. So at some point, I said, do you know you are a fear generator? And at that moment, that was the first time that something was said in that organization that everybody felt. Nobody could pinpoint exactly what was going on, but there came a whole lot of relief after it was said.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not nice to hear these things like you're a fear generator. But so the point of departure usually for a reset is to name truly the elephant in the room, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pressure is released, and then the pattern is not longer taking the parts into hostage.
Right.
Because that's usually what patterns can do. They
Yeah.
take all the members in a kind of hostage.
Yeah.
So you first need to free the hostage, and then they are free to co-create, like, okay, what could be new relationships? And
Right.
that takes like maybe between half a year and 2 years time to work
through that. Yeah. Wow.
that,
Thank
yeah.
you for the example. And I can only imagine bringing such, let me say, information to the system. So I just imagine you're doing a constellation with them. You're naming the elephant in the room.
Yes.
And it hits home for many people. And it may be very painful for a system to look at.
Yes.
So how do you stay standing in a situation like this? Because a number of things can happen. And because it's a very strong pattern, the system can also push back because they're used to being in that hijacked type of situation, and usually that also has a function. So how do you stay standing in situations like this? And for example, how do you work with like, for example, when the system wants to kick you out because you named the elephant in the room? How do you deal with situations like those?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, and thank you for your question, because it makes me very aware, when we, so it's me and the people in the room, when we somehow manage to name the elephant,
Yeah.
it's a relief, and they don't kick me out, and the system doesn't kick me out.
Okay.
It rarely happens to me that I'm kicked out, although it recently happened again last week. It was the first time again for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And the reason there was somehow we did not manage to name the elephant in the room. And the system is stronger than me, and the system is stronger than everybody in the room. And then you feel, okay, nothing is going to happen here.
Yeah.
I remember one other case where it was in a police organization where I came, and a very high policeman, before I could say anything, said to everybody, and me including, well, we are one big family. And at that moment, I didn't know it then, but at that moment I could have gone home.
Yeah.
Because what he said is the elephant in the room may not be mentioned. And then I'm kicked out by the system.
Yeah.
So when these things happen now, I know very early in the beginning, and I tell them, hey, it's okay for me to go home. And it's okay if the system goes on like it goes on.
Yeah.
That's fine with me. So the reason that I'm kicked out is more when we do not succeed to find what is the key point why things are going as they are going now. When we cannot find it, and then of course the system is right to kick me out. So the system is stronger than we are, and then it has to kick me out. because systems do one thing. Systems do want continuation. They want to go on forever, forever, forever.
Mm.
They want to produce predictability. They
Yeah.
want to produce continuity. So that's their aim.
Yeah.
And I like it that big companies that, or systems, not the companies, but the system of the companies, their aim is to continue as they are doing already for ages,
Yeah.
and want to continue. And I really like it. It's nice. I know people in the organization do not like it, that their patterns want to continue forever.
Yeah.
But I do. Yeah, it's what they're supposed to. It keeps society together.
Yeah.
If we all would transform, we could easily go into a kind of chaos which we cannot hold anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whatever we need to do
Yes.
as systemic workers is to somehow to hold what we are creating.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's real hard work, what we call holding space. So if it's not possible to hold space, that's another reason that the system might kick me out. But that's not such a nice reason, because it means that we leave more chaos than was there before we started it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really, if I can prevent it, I want to prevent it.
Yeah, yeah. So let me sum this up. So what you covered so far is, and thank you for speaking to this, I'm sure that many systems workers can relate, is that systems want to live on, they want to continue, they want to move forward. And when you come in, because a number of people in the system say we run into patterns that we no longer want to run, or there's something going on, then actually they see your role and function also to help them in uncovering what's keeping them stuck. And so what I hear you say is, I see as part of my role to also help them name the elephant in the room, or to be the instrument, or use myself as an instrument to name the elephant in the room. And that when the system kicks me out, it's not when I name the elephant in the room, it's when I do not do that. And
Exactly.
another reason for the system is when I'm not containing the process that I am facilitating. And so it requires, to me, that requires, and somehow the word leadership pops up. Because everything that, for me, that has to do with holding space, and we also talked to Heather Platt in the context of this summit in one of our previous editions, is that the role and function of leadership in systems, and the role and function of leadership in when you come in as a facilitator to help, or as a professional or consultant, or however you want to call yourself, and you do systemic work with clients, then it requires a certain leadership in the space holding, in the naming the elephant in the room, in the guiding the client to see the patterns that are unveiled. And so I'm really particularly interested in this aspect also of the work, because and I'm bridging it with the leadership that's in organizations. So you also wrote a book about systemic leadership. And what I find fascinating in there is that you say systems lead, and systems are stronger than us as individuals, or us as human beings who are part of it. So what can you say about the role and function of leadership, both within the organization and in the facilitator, when you're trying to uncover these patterns, when you're trying to name the elephant in the room, so that there can be a different perpetuation? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So first, a little bit about leadership in organizations. And I need to make a very, very little detour.
Okay.
So what we talked about already a lot is that systems have a tendency to create patterns, and the function of patterns is continuation, predictability, continuity.
Yeah.
So, and this continuity is much longer than the people engaged in an organization.
Yeah.
So it can go
Obviously.
for 10 centuries even. Then, of course, you have the whole aspect of the free will of what do you want to do with such an organization?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? How to set goals? So that's more a little bit, let's say that the rational part
Yeah.
of what leaders can do
Yeah.
in an organization.
Yeah.
But then, and this can work against the existing patterns.
Yeah.
So and the interesting thing is, if you're not aware of how the system as a whole is behaving,
Mm-hmm.
you think you are leading the company, but in fact, the system is also leading you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I see it as a dance between what do you want, or what does the market want with the company, and what is the system doing?
Mm-hmm.
And if you understand these two mechanisms more, it's much easier to lead the organization.
Yeah.
Then one third aspect, and that's what we call a kind of evolutionary force.
Yeah.
That's a large force, like a big wind, blowing through society as a whole and blowing through the world as a whole. And this aspect, this evolutionary force, tells us what systems are coming to an end.
Yeah.
When is the end of the life cycle?
Okay.
For example, in the Netherlands, we have this concept of after World War II, like you can create society, but it's clear we cannot.
No.
So some structures we created after World War II, like governmental structures or the tax institutes, somehow, or the whole concept of education in schools, it's somehow coming to an end.
Yeah.
And that's the third aspect. That's being aware of what are the big movements in society and what is coming to an end, and where is a vacuum, where space for something completely new.
Yeah.
These three aspects of the free will, of systems that want to continue,
Mm-hmm.
and of the evolutionary force giving impulses, and they can either be innovative or these impulses can be destructive, to find a way of understanding between these three different mechanisms. I think that could be extremely helpful for leaders nowadays.
Right. 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 Thank you for that explanation. And so, and as I'm listening to you, I'm also seeing how strong a part that is of your paradigm and what you're
Yes.
bringing when you work with organizations. And so, this is the part of how, let me say, how leadership is shaping itself. Um, and I'm just wondering, as a facilitator, when you work with leaders, um, as we mentioned earlier, I'm tying it back to that, is how can you then use the leadership that you bring to support what the triangle that the leaders are grappling with that you just explained? Because some are aware, some are not aware. As a facilitator, you can bring more awareness to that. So how does that interaction around leadership and helping the system move forward work for you?
Yeah, well, it makes you shy a little bit, because I don't think of myself in terms of my leadership.
Mhm.
It is, I just feel more like either doing the things I like to do,
Mhm.
either to be curiosity driven
Uh-huh.
by what makes that things are going as they are going in this organization. So I feel very much in service of that organization as a whole.
Mhm.
Actually, I feel in service of society, but
Mm.
not because I want to change society. So I feel part of my leadership is feeling very shy.
Mm.
I'm always scared because I never know what will come. So every intervention is new. I cannot make the interventions up front.
No.
So I'm always scared. I also tell that I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, and this sounds strange, I need to be stronger than the strongest person in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and this is not a power game.
Mm-mm.
It's just if I'm not stronger than the strongest person in the room, then the system will kick me out as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, in being both at the same time the lowest in rank and the highest in rank, and the highest in rank, uh, I do not mean in the function of the people in the room, but
Mm-hmm.
that's somehow being both the lowest in rank and the highest in rank. I think I create a kind of space in
Yeah.
which these things are possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm very aware that whatever I do, I never want to push leaders out of their place.
No.
Because if that would be the result, the intervention would be more disaster than it would be beneficial, I think. I worked too long for a consulting company where at the end we never wondered what happens with the leaders after we left.
Yeah.
And I think
Wow.
in many cases, yeah, temporarily we pushed leaders out of their place and we did not, yeah, we didn't take care of how to, can they come back to their places after
Mm-hmm.
we left?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Aware of this phenomenon. So the thing is, how could my leadership be in a way that I'm only there temporarily
Mm-hmm.
and it strengthens the system as a whole?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a little bit navigating and
Yeah.
like yeah.
Thank you so much for articulating this. And I very much resonate with what you're saying, because as a facilitator, when you work with a client organization, you're there to serve, or to add to something, or to help with something.
Yeah.
And I'm using these words, but actually, I would love to use better suitable words, but I can't find any. Um, but the way you just articulated it, um, it really gives an understanding of, also what's part of your paradigm in terms of how do I shape, um, how do I co-create, and what can I do in the leadership facilitator subsystem to serve the bigger system and serve the question that is asked at that point, or the question that the system is asking
Mm.
your help with. And that's why the word leadership popped up for me. And thank you for articulating it, because in the space where you're working, where you're doing the constellation, where there's leaders in the room, the holding space requires that your leadership is bigger than the biggest person in the room. Otherwise, how can you contain, and how
Exactly.
can they then make their movement in that
Yeah.
space? And on the other hand, it's not about making yourself bigger than the system that is sort of discovering of itself and looking at itself and
Yes.
unpacking the patterns.
Yes.
Because otherwise, it's going to be looking at you and asking, "What am I looking at?"
Exactly.
Um, and if you do that from the upper position, then you're doing something else than systemic work.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for speaking to that. And I'm really hoping that is clear for everyone who's watching. In there, you also mentioned about the evolutionary force. And before we close out this conversation, I really also want to talk to you about that, at a number of different levels. And one is, um, when you look at the evolutionary force of this work, of the systemic phenomenological work, um, What are things that you sense or you see as potential that we could further unpack for this work?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. This evolutionary force both create war and peace,
Mm-hmm.
both create crisis and prosperity.
Yeah,
You never know what happens. So the thing is, the evolutionary force works beyond our notion of good and bad.
yeah.
That's good to, that's important to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And when it goes to systemic work, it's hard to say what its potential is, because you never know in this in face of this evolutionary force.
Mm-hmm.
My sense is there's a lot of potential in this systemic phenomenological work, and I think because it's not a constructed notion, the systemic work. It's very inherent to human beings living in tribes
Yeah,
and living in herds.
yeah.
So it's not a theory made up. It's more a theory uncovered.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And I think so, as long as they're human beings, uh, by nature, human beings are having what I call a systemic intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
I think most leaders are leaders because they are systemic intelligent,
Yeah.
regardless how they use it.
Right.
And let's be clear, for sure, people like Hitler, people like Stalin, people like Mao were very systemic intelligent.
Mm.
Only the way how they used it caused a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah.
So, and this I find interesting. What is the systemic intelligence in IS? What is the systemic intelligence in Donald Trump? What is the systemic intelligence also in corruption?
Mm-hmm.
So I think systemic work has a lot of potential still to understand mechanisms that we do not like so much in this world.
Yeah.
But in order to understand this mechanism, you somehow need to embrace them and even to love them.
Mm-hmm.
And loving things like corruption does not mean that you say corruption is a good thing.
No.
Loving Islamic State does not mean that you like what Islamic State is doing, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Because people like it, of course,
Yeah.
but not everybody. So I think there's still a lot of potential in this whole systemic phenomenological approach.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, if its destiny is its reach of the systemic work, it's fine with me.
Yeah.
Then we do different.
Hmm.
So if it's eternal, no, I don't think so. It has a time, and then other things will come in again.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for speaking to that, especially to potential that there's potential in looking places that we have a tendency to call wrong, evil, bad, and
Yeah,
all those things,
yeah,
because there's huge um, intelligence and huge discovery and exploration to do there that we may have avoided for obvious reasons.
yes.
Um, we're talking about the evolutionary force, and just now you spoke to systemic work. I would like to continue to the Bert Hellinger Institute
Hmm.
and ask you the same question, because you founded the institute. It was officially opened by Bert Hellinger, and
Yes.
he passed away in September 2019. Um, what's the evolutionary force that's at play for the institute?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are in permanent struggle because we are creating a system in this Bert Hellinger Institute, and permanent struggle between the patterns that we created somehow
Mm-hmm.
and, and the evolutionary force.
All right.
So, for example, I think the essence of the Hellinger Institute, if I would what are we in essence?
Mm-hmm.
Um, with something like potential liberators. So where there is potential in the outside world, we would like to free it in a certain way.
Yeah.
But and we are generators of knowledge. So we are really driven by curiosity,
Yeah.
and curiosity leads to a better understanding.
Yeah.
So we generate knowledge, and we're spreading knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But the spreading of knowledge means that we quickly become a kind of training institute or education institute,
Yeah.
which creates patterns and continuation.
Mm-hmm.
So when we become too much a training institute, I only think, oh, I don't want to be trapped into the pattern too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to create new forms, new ways of understanding the world in order to escape the pattern of becoming a training institute.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I think there are so many new and exciting things going on in the world we would like to explore.
Yeah.
So I think as long as we stay explorers, there's still a lot of potential.
Yeah.
If I make a wild guess, I wouldn't be surprised if there is like 30, 35 years more potential in this institute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's, yeah, from my gut feeling, it would be like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are some requirements in terms of staying open and curious, and not being too stuck in perpetuating patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and speaking of this evolutionary force, it's the only thing I can do is be sensitive for what are the messages that society is yelling at me all the time.
Yeah.
These messages are subtle. It's a subtle energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always very clear. So I need to be a little bit free to see what are these messages sent.
Yeah.
For example, I think one of the upcoming questions is, what does it mean when you stand up and take responsibility? So it's not what is required to stand up and take responsibility, but what if you stand up and what do you meet afterwards?
Right.
I meet a moment very often that people who take responsibility and to act, afterwards they are met with a tsunami of opposition.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is really that, in a way, it's a little bit of concern. Like, and I would really want to probe a little bit deeper into this. What does it mean in the present world to stand up and take responsibility?
Yeah.
It's a little bit the same with what you do. You're
Yeah.
standing up
Yeah.
and you're doing something in the world which is called systemic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
That it might be possible. And at one hand, it sounds nice and wonderful, but when it really touches on it, it
Yeah.
might mean that you will be meeting a tsunami of a kind of counterforce.
Yeah, I'm experiencing some tsunami. I have been. And undoubtedly there will be more. Yeah, but I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this could be an upcoming topic to focus on. And so I'm open for upcoming topics being yelled at me somehow. I'm open to explore.
Mm.
That's how far I can see the evolutionary force. It's not planned, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I work with what comes.
So it requires the sensitivity of being able to hear it and catch it when it's emitted.
And it requires to deconstruct the insights I was having so far.
Right.
And that's an important one.
Because it helps you to break the patterns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it also requires then that you deal with at some point that you keep curious about your own patterns and how you can break your own patterns in order to I don't know, in order to stay standing in the evolutionary force instead of becoming, to put it on the other end of the extreme, becoming completely obsolete because there's such stuckness in their own patterns that you have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We all know systems have a tendency to create their own closeness. They to become closed systems. This is what I would like to try to avoid if it's possible at all. So the moment this approach, systemic phenomenological approach, becomes a closed system, That for me would be a good reason to either step out or either to deconstruct the whole thing.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting, because I asked you about the Bert Hellinger Institute, and I was going to ask you about you next, but we're already talking about you, aren't we? When it comes to the evolutionary force of what's happening with your leadership in this field.
Yeah, I really don't know. And that is the nature of this evolutionary force. You cannot really plan it.
Yeah.
So, main thing, I think I'm available.
Hmm.
I'm available for what comes.
Yeah.
I'm more and more only interested in major topics in organizations and in society.
Hmm.
And of course, my contribution is very, very, very little. I do not have any intention to make an impact in the world. My freedom is the notion that after two or three generations, I will be completely forgotten.
Mm.
That's the biggest blessing for me, and
Wow.
maybe the biggest resource, the freedom of being forgotten after my death. And I think, yeah, and I like that freedom to be forgotten. I like the freedom not wanting to have any impact in the world. And I like the freedom of just being available for what comes.
Right.
And I think this is how far I can look. I'm 65 years now. I also feel a little bit I come into a next phase of my life
Mm.
that started actually when he was 65 with
Yes.
the Constellations. So I'm maybe I'm copying him. No, I'm not copying him. But yeah, I'm open for what comes. But I really do not know. And partly it scares me, and partly it makes me happy to find this new freedom.
Yeah. And Jakob, we've been talking about um, systemic phenomenological work, and
Yes.
also we talked about how you shape it and how you look at systems entry, or how organizations find you in a way where you can at least detangle what their question is, where you have a choice at the level of first, second, or third intervention that you wish to work at. And we talked about leadership, we talked about evolutionary force, and we talked about you and how you shape your leadership in your life. And especially your viewpoint that you just shared about um, that sense of being forgotten after a couple of generations, and being open means that you can be scared and explore at the same time, and serve from that place. So I'd like to say thank you so much for being in the summit and for being in conversation with me here.
You're most welcome, and thank you so much for your questions. It's always helpful to reflect a little bit, and yeah, thank you for your kindness and your hosting.
Thank you. And to everyone who's been watching, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jan Jakob Stam as much as I did. If you want to continue the conversation or reflect on it more, please go to our online community space. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.